I'm Lima Milan, and in this video we're going to look at Ableton Live's Arpeggiator MIDI device. So first, let's talk about what an arpeggio is. It's when we take a chord, which can consist of 3 or more notes, and rather than playing them in unison and unified at the same time, it plays them in a different order. So it turns them into a rhythmical aspect. So let me show you what I mean by this. If I just play you this short example. So as you can see in here, we have some triad type chords just running through. So just three notes within the chord. And if we add the arpeggiator to this, so if I go to, just close this for a minute, go to MIDI Effects and Arpeggiator, and we just load that onto the track, it'll sound very different. So you can see it takes the notes that we played in the chord and turns them into a rhythmical event instead. So the arpeggiator itself has a lot of controls on it, so I'll run through those. But the main thing is we have a preset library which starts us off. We can try out a few of those. And then of course we can just try and reset that back to its default and try and program it the way we want it. So let's get into that now. So let's go through the first few controls. We have the style option, which is basically what it does to the notes once it receives them. So on that note, the arpeggiator is a MIDI device, which basically means it only deals with the note data before it's given to an instrument, which then turns that note data into audio that we can hear and have running through our mixing environment in Ableton Live. So you can't drag an arpeggiator to an audio track, it can only go onto a MIDI track. So this has an instrument on it, it is a MIDI track, you can see my MIDI notes, which are my chords, and then it runs through this device and then it gives out the interpreted versions of those notes. So the way it interprets it is this style aspect here. So we have up and down in terms of if I hold this chord, just turn it off for a minute. Okay, that's my chord that I'm playing. If I'm in up mode, it will play from the lowest to the highest and cycle round. Now, a cycle round based on how many notes, so if I add an octave above in this chord. Now the cycle length has changed because there's another note that needs to be played before it goes back to the beginning of the upwards cycle. Now there are many other types of ways of modifying these notes, and the quickest ways to visualize this is to actually just pull up the live manual for a minute. And we have the upwards notes, we have the downwards notes, we have the up and down notes, and various sort of variations of that. We have the converge and diverge, where it takes the furthest apart notes first and then goes towards a kind of an inwards funnel, and then the opposite, it goes from the closest neighbouring notes to an outwards funnel in terms of the playing order that it does for these chords. But on that note, there's a control that you need to be aware of, which is this offset control. So at the moment I'm in upwards, which means that those 3 notes that I played before, we played lowest to highest. But if I offset it, so offset it by 1 step upwards, it'll now start on the second note out of the 3. So it was like this before. And then 2 steps up means it goes to the 3rd note, which is there, and then starts from the highest note and then suddenly jumps down to the beginning to start that upward cycle again. So these, in practice, are very useful ways of first dialing in and trying to get something that sounds good in context of what you're working on, but secondly, gives you ways of varying it over time within your composition. So a quick tip with that, if we click and do show automation, we can show the automation of these different values, and in the context of a full arrangement, it could be that once the main arpeggiated piece is established in the song, you create some variations by modifying some of these parameters in real time. So there's changes within your song for variation. So the rate that it's running at is controlled here, which is synchronized to the tempo at the moment. And then we have this gate function, which basically controls how much distance is between the notes and makes them short and gated, so staccato in style, or there can be legato in style where they flow into the next note, so it becomes like a continuous flow of information. So if we change the gate value, and again this could be changed over time in terms of automation, we've got lots of ways of creating variation to arpeggiated sound. So we have the groove section here, which allows us to add some feel, some offsetting of certain rhythms, so we get a bit more of a rhythmic feel to this. Now, if you want to change how strong this is, what you actually have to do is go to what we call the groove pull, which is this little sort of sideways wave icon. And then we just change the global amount. So if I pull that fully down, it will sound like none of the swing is being applied. And then as I add more, you'll hear the swing being established or added in a more a certain way. So basically changing the strength of that change in rhythm and feel. So I'm just going to set that back to straight for a minute. From a performer's point of view, this is a good control. It's called hold, which basically means once you've established the first chord, it will continue that cycle of notes until you intervene and change what the chord is. So very handy from a performing point of view. You could have something started there, lean over to another part of your performance setup, and then as needed, just enter the new chords and still be able to be between two different sort of devices. So sync can be switched to a non-synchronized form, so it's just a measurement of time, which is really good for what we call stutter edit. So I can go from a high value and create something that's really, really fast. I'll just play you that in terms of this little example here. So this is the stutter edit where I've edited the sync to non-synchronized function for the two different song sections, and I've also changed the rate sort of rhythmically or musically within the part too. So let's just turn that off so the chords are as they were, and I'll play this example. Okay, so let's get back to the arpeggiator over on our chords track here. So we set it back to synchronize. We've got a gate setting that we like. We understand the offset, the groove we can have, and the running order of the notes that we choose as well. Let's have a look at our retrigger section here. So retriggering at the moment, it's just running continuously wherever we restart playing with that. But we can set it so new notes will re-trigger the sequence. So remember, we're running from lowest to highest because we're on the starting style of upwards. Now, if I hold the main chord I've been doing with my left hand and add some new notes, you'll hear that you don't hear the new note. You actually hear the beginning of the cycle and then it gets to that new note. So it's a way of restarting the emphasis of the looping pattern. So it's a very good way of controlling it, either in a performance sense or just to be able to edit the chords so you know you're restarting a pattern every time you add some new notes. Beat mode is like synchronization in terms of the rate. It just allows you to set when it will just re-emphasize that starting point. So if we're in beat mode, just restarting that every time we see the activator light there. If you set it too fast, it might run so fast it doesn't get a chance to ever go through the full cycle of notes, and therefore you don't really hear its effect. So going over to Transpose, what we have is it will take the existing arpeggiated pattern it's made, and then it will do repeats of it, and you choose what it does to those repeats over time. So if I set it to repeat my chord a second time, so add one, so we have our original chord and then we have a step of another change to it. In shift mode, it will take the distance and just literally take the notes as if we're in a MIDI editor and just shift them all up by a certain amount or down by a certain amount. So it's set to +12 at the moment, which is a octave. So it's going to take that chord I've played and then as if, let me just turn this off, it's going to take that chord and then play a copy of it up there, but I'm not going to do that. That's what the device is going to do. So it's set to +12 on one step, so it'll do a modification as the second repeat. So if you add another step, it's going to go octave we're originally in, octave above, and octave above that too. Now, if you've already established a musical key that you're working in, you can actually limit the notes that are created when it does this shifting function to the notes which are compatible to the given key that you're in. One last tip on the transpose section is we can set, let's say, steps to something like, let's say 8 steps. And if we set it to 1 semitone at a time, it will do a chromatic shift. So over the repeats of 8 of these repeats, it will do a single note movement upwards for the chord that I play in the first place. So it will sound a lot like a sort of a chiptune effect or a special effect within a cartoon, like a magic potion effect. So let's just put that in context. So we've got it set to doing 8 of the steps, and then we have it only doing a single movement up by 1 key each time it repeats. Let's just take retrigger mode off there because that's restarting the sequence and we don't want it to, we want it to run through. Take one of those off. If we speed that up, you can see that kind of cartoon special magic kind of effect as well. So the shift section, we've got one more bit to cover in terms of arpeggiator, which is the velocity section. So this section allows you to hold down your chord, and then over a certain period of time, it will reduce the intensity of those notes being struck, which we call velocity. So you have a velocity value of between 0 and 127, 127 being the highest possible sort of intensity you could strike a key at, 0 being no information at all in terms of intensity. So if we set this target, which is our ending velocity, to something low, and we set our decay to quite a long time, just so we can hear this really clearly in our ears, let's say up to about 4 seconds. If I hold my chord now, let's just take the steps off here, just so that doesn't confuse us. So we're just doing a straight chord, and then it's going to reduce the velocity over time. Okay, now if I set it to retrigger, and we set it to notes mode, add a new note, it will retrigger the high intensity velocity. Now let's try and just alter that and add some repeats. And that'll give us a definite ending, this repeat control, to how many cycles that will happen of our pattern being played. And again, from a performance point of view, that's quite handy because it stops us having to be so definite on when we take our hands off the keyboard as well. Okay, so I'm just going to put this in context now. So I'm going to just press Q to reload in the original preset for this. And I'm going to play this in context of the song and find a sequence that I think works for the actual backing track. Okay, so between the feel that I've gone for, using the swing control, using the velocity just to create some emphasis for each one of those chords that changes on a nice clean bar, create something that kind of lives and breathes a little bit. So the last thing we need to cover is how do we make that information we can see? Because at the moment, it's all real time. It's all happening right now. Those chords are written and they go in to the arpeggiator, but we never see the notes that come out of it. We just hear them go into the instrument. So what we can do is capture those notes. So if we go to create a new MIDI track and we tell that new MIDI track to listen to our track that has the arpeggiator on there, we have an option of either capturing the MIDI pre-effects or post-effects. Now if we shoot or set it to record pre-effects and just record arm that, you'll notice that the activity light here just shows the activity of the chord. So it's actually just trying to capture the chords. I don't want that. I want to capture the output of the arpeggiator. So I'll set it to post effects, and we now see the notes going into that new track are the output of the arpeggiator, not the input. So it's not the chords we're actually going to record here. It's going to be the output of the arpeggiator, the individual notes. So I'm going to just set this up to record a clean bar, a clean recording here. So I'm going to turn loop off. I'm going to set punch out, which means that the end of my loop brace is where the MIDI clip will stop. Saves me editing it afterwards. So as long as I start off at bar 1, beat 1, and I hit record, okay, so we have the MIDI captured, but it's not actually being sent to the original instrument at this time. So we have two options. We can either go and grab the instruments from here and drag them to this new MIDI track, or we can just drag and drop the new MIDI clip we've recorded onto the original clip, but we must either remove or disengage the arpeggiator, otherwise we're doing a second generation of processing that MIDI again through the arpeggiator. So let's just get rid of the arpeggiator, and we'll now hear exactly the same as what we had before, except it's real tangible notes that we can go in and modify with our editor at a later date. Okay, so we've looked at Ableton Live's Arpeggiator MIDI device. We understand all the controls, how we can use those to create an interesting pattern, how we can create variation to that pattern and potentially automate those over time, and finally, how to capture them to a new MIDI track and then commit that MIDI data to a new MIDI clip.